Long before Dracula became myth, there was Vlad Tepes, a real prince, forged in betrayal, exile, and endless war. A boy raised by enemies, a king denied his crown, a man who returned not to negotiate, but to terrify. They say he drank blood. They say he dined among the dead. They say forests of impaled bodies marked his path like tombstone warnings. But here's what they don't say. He was a master of psychological warfare. He used fear as strategy, and he knew that when horror is seen from afar, it becomes legend. Vlad didn't just impale his enemies, he impaled certainty. He made his people believe that even whispering his name could summon death. He didn't want loyalty. He wanted obedience. And obedience, he knew, was born in the shadow of dread.
All of us are self-made, but only the successful will admit it.
Part 1. The boy raised by wolves, forged in hostage chains. Before Vlad impaled his enemies, he was taught to bow to them, and he never forgot how it felt. Wallachia, 1442. A volatile frontier between the Christian kingdoms of Europe and the Islamic Ottoman Empire. A land soaked in betrayal, blood, and foreign rule, torn between crusaders and conquerors. And somewhere in this tension-filled landscape, a boy was about to be erased. Vlad III, son of Vlad II Dracula, a ruler sworn to protect Wallachia, was not born to rule. He was born to be traded. As a show of loyalty to the Sultan of the Ottomans, Vlad's father handed over two of his sons, of Vlad and his younger brother, Radu, not as guests, but as hostages. They were shipped like chess pieces across the Danube River, into the heart of the empire, and locked inside Edirne, the majestic capital of their enemies. The palace gleamed with silk, gold, and perfumed air, but beneath its polished floors was a prison, not of walls, but of eyes. The boys were watched, studied, tested, broken. They weren't chained to iron. They were bound to obligation. If their father betrayed the Sultan, they would suffer. Vlad was only 11. At an age when most boys hunted deer in the forest or played with wooden swords, he was being taught to bow, to kneel not in prayer, but in calculated survival. He was instructed in Ottoman customs, warfare, religion, and language. He learned the ways of Islam, the codes of diplomacy, the elegance of poetry. But he also learned something darker: how to administer punishment, how to interrogate without breaking the skin, how to make pain last longer than mercy could remember. In marble halls, he saw floggings. In silk-draped rooms, he heard screams. He learned that rulers didn't just govern through law, they ruled through fear performed with grace. His brother Radu adapted. He became handsome, charming, soft to the Ottomans, pliable. They called him Radu the Handsome. He embraced the court, and the court embraced him. But Vlad grew still. He didn't soften. He hardened. He learned to hide his rage behind silence, to calculate every look, every word, every weakness. He watched the generals, the guards, the interrogators. He memorized how power moved, not with screams, but with precision and patience. He was alone in a gilded cage, but instead of despairing, he studied the structure of that cage. And as the years passed, he began to understand something most never grasp. The most dangerous man in the room is the one who's learned how to disappear without ever being forgotten. By the time he returned to Wallachia, he was no longer the boy they sent away. He wasn't just scarred, he was shaped by humiliation, by hierarchy, by horror. He had tasted fear, But more importantly, he had learned how to serve it to others. Strategic breakdown, becoming a phantom of power. Vlad's exile wasn't a delay in destiny. It was a dark incubation. He didn't grow up in a castle learning etiquette. He grew up in the belly of an empire learning psychological dominance. What emerged wasn't just a prince. It was the blueprint of a silent predator. Let's break it down. Forced invisibility. Vlad learned to survive by becoming underestimated. He didn't seek recognition. He let others expose their weakness first. Emotional containment. Public displays of anger or sorrow were punished. He became emotionally unreadable, a trait crucial to psychological warfare. Observation as weaponry. He watched and memorized how power flowed, who flinched, who spoke too much, who feared silence. This transformed him into a master of timing and reaction. Most rulers learn leadership. Vlad learned how to turn suppression into leverage. A message made for masters. Visibility is a trap. Master the shadows. Vlad's genius wasn't in being feared immediately. It was in disappearing first. He learned that sometimes the most terrifying power is the one no one sees coming. Here's your edge. Be absent, intentionally. Don't fight every battle. Let your silence build tension. Make others fill the void with their own insecurity. Observe instead of react. Watch the power dynamics in any room. Don't speak to be heard. Speak when your words can shift the entire atmosphere. Let people underestimate the quiet one. While others play the loud game, build unseen leverage. And when you strike with precision they never prepared for. Because when people begin to fear what they don't see, you don't need a sword. You've already drawn blood. Part 2. The Return of the Broken Prince, Claiming Power Through Blood. Vlad didn't return to reclaim a crown. He returned to settle a debt with steel. Years passed. The boy who had once watched empires from behind a curtain had become a man, hardened, sharpened, changed. He emerged from the Ottoman lands not with ceremony, but with silence. His name was nearly forgotten. His legacy had been smothered under betrayal, foreign occupation, and dynastic puppetry. Wallachia was a bleeding wound. Corrupt nobles pulled it in every direction while foreign powers played kings like dice. But Vlad remembered everything, and he carried each memory like a blade. His father, Vlad II Dracula, betrayed by the very nobles who once bowed before him. His older brother, murdered in secret, buried alive, and Wallachia itself, his birthright, defiled by cowardice and chaos. He didn't come back with parades. He came back with purpose. First, he made a bold political play, seizing the throne in a moment of chaos, supported by foreign allies eager to weaken rival factions. But Vlad knew power gained by others' favor was power you didn't own. So when he was inevitably driven out, he disappeared again, waiting, observing. And then, in 1456, he returned. But this time, he didn't come back as a claimant. He came back as an executioner with a crown. It began with an invitation, an elegant Easter feast hosted by the newly returned Prince of Wallachia. He summoned the boyars, the very nobles who had betrayed his family, to join him. They came wearing silk. They came with smiles. They came thinking they had won. They drank. They laughed. They toasted to peace. And Vlad watched. He sat at the head of the table, calm, calculated, unreadable. His silence was louder than their celebration. Then came the moment. Without raising his voice, without breaking his expression, Vlad gave the signal. Steel erupted from every corner of the hall. His soldiers, hidden in shadows, dragged the nobles from the banquet like cattle to slaughter. Some were impaled on the spot. Others, stronger and younger, were shackled and marched, miles on foot, until they collapsed, only to be enslaved, rebuilding the fortress of Ponari. The message was not subtle. This wasn't justice. This was revenge with choreography. He didn't kill to punish. He killed to erase. Bloodlines, alliances, lineage, gone. And for the survivors, noble or peasant, the message was etched into their memory like fire into wood. This is not your kingdom anymore. It is mine. Vlad had crossed a threshold. He was no longer a prince. He had become a punishment made flesh. Strategic breakdown. Terror as legitimacy. What Vlad executed wasn't just an act of vengeance. It was a system upgrade. He replaced a broken feudal order with a singular, ruthless hierarchy. His hierarchy. Let's unpack the dark psychological brilliance at play. Symbolic violence. The Easter feast was meant to represent unity, rebirth, and tradition. Vlad inverted the symbol, turning communion into carnage. The trauma that caused reshaped Wallachian identity. Collective erasure. By not just punishing individuals, but destroying entire families, he created a new psychological reality. One where fear was hereditary. Your last name could be your death sentence. Hijacking rituals. Feasts, alliances, pageantry. These were the sacred rituals of noble diplomacy. Vlad used those same rituals to broadcast his ruthlessness. It wasn't betrayal. It was the redesign of tradition. And that's what made him so dangerous. He didn't just kill his enemies. He replaced the entire language of power. A message made for masters. Symbolism is stronger than force. Vlad didn't just eliminate opponents. He turned their deaths into living symbols. He understood that memory is more powerful than law. Fear reinforced by image lasts longer than any decree. Here's your edge. In your life, leadership, or influence, use symbolic decisions to shape perception. Deliver consequences with theatrical weight. Don't just fire someone. Make it a moment that reshapes how the rest of the team performs the next day. Turn moments into memory. Don't just reprimand. Connect it to a timeless principle others can't ignore. Transform tradition into authority. Don't just use rituals. Redefine them around your message so they belong to you. Because when people carry your actions like parables, you don't need to remind them who's in control. Your legend already did. Part 3. The Forest of Stakes. Building a Kingdom of Fear. When words failed, Vlad let the dead speak for him. With his enemies crushed and the crown reclaimed, Vlad set out to do something few rulers dared. He didn't just want to govern Wallachia. He wanted to reprogram it. To burn every lesson of betrayal, weakness, and treachery out of its people like poison from a wound. To create a nation not loyal out of love, but obedient out of terror. So he began constructing the most infamous symbol of his legacy, the Forest of Stakes. It began with criminals, thieves, killers, deserters, but it didn't stop there. Vlad extended the punishment to anyone who crossed the line. A corrupt merchant, a soldier who disobeyed, a foreign envoy who delivered a message without removing his hat. No one was safe, no one was exempt, and it wasn't done in secret. He wanted it seen. Bodies impaled on stakes as high as 10 feet. Thousands of them. Whole valleys transformed into gruesome forests. The dead displayed like grim sculptures, limbs twitching, mouths agape, their pain frozen in time. They were arranged in patterns. Rows, circles, spirals, each one told a story. Every village became a theater of horror. Ambassadors from Western Europe wept and vomited. Ottoman generals turned their horses around. Traders left behind their goods rather than pass through Wallachia. But here's the genius. Vlad didn't just use brutality to punish. He used it to govern without interference. If your enemies never even enter your territory, you don't need to raise a sword. If people fear being misunderstood, they'll never risk disobedience. He didn't need a bureaucracy. He didn't need spies. He didn't need laws. He had fear, visible, visceral, and unforgettable. He understood the psychological calculus. Fear isn't effective when it's whispered. It's effective when it's performed. And Vlad wasn't just a warlord. He was a director of terror. Strategic breakdown, horror as governance. This wasn't medieval madness. It was calculated social control. Vlad transformed the act of punishment into a method of mass messaging. Let's examine how this system worked. Shock theater. Vlad didn't hide his cruelty. He put it on stage. He turned executions into operas, pain into performance. Mimetic fear. The forest of stakes wasn't just about killing. It was about contagious fear. People who saw it never forgot it. People who heard about it imagined worse. Ubiquitous consequence. Every town, every border, every road had a tale of impalement. This decentralized his presence. He didn't need to be everywhere. Fear was. And what's more, he made fear go viral centuries before the internet. A message made for masters. Visibility can be more terrifying than secrecy. Vlad knew something that modern leaders, influencers, and tacticians still forget. What people can see will shape them far more than what they're told. A visible consequence has more power than 1,000 quiet corrections. Here's your edge. In your business, your leadership, your life, use visibility as leverage. Make discipline public when it matters. Don't just enforce your standards. Make your stance seen so others self-correct. Design your message to spread. Use memorable action, not just repetition. People repeat what startles them, not what blends in. Leave symbolic reminders of what happens when lines are crossed. This could be a terminated partnership, a revoked privilege, or a project shut down loudly. It sets a tone others won't forget. Because when people see what happens to those who cross the line, you don't need to warn them anymore. They'll warn each other. Part 4. The Empire of Eyes. Paranoia, control, and the fear of being forgotten. Once fear becomes your crown, trust becomes your enemy. Vlad had conquered his enemies. He had silenced his rivals. But the thing about ruling with terror is this. The moment people stop fearing you, they start remembering who you used to be. So Vlad didn't stop. He couldn't. To maintain the kingdom he had forged in dread, he had to go beyond brutality. He needed eyes everywhere. He built an empire of watchers, spies among merchants, whispers in the army, shadows in the court. Even in small villages, peasants suspected their own neighbors. No one knew who worked for Vlad, so everyone acted like they did. This is how you maintain power without presence. Through manufactured paranoia. At first it worked. Corruption dropped. Crime nearly vanished. Merchants paid exact amounts, no more, no less. Guards stayed at their posts in freezing rain rather than risk being reported. But over time, something shifted. The fear that once protected the kingdom began to infect it. People didn't just fear disobedience, they feared being noticed. Loyalty became suspicion. Obedience became paranoia. And Vlad, once the silent architect of control, began unraveling beneath the weight of his own legend. He doubled executions. He distrusted even his closest men. He started killing faster, more erratically. It was no longer just about removing threats. It was about maintaining the illusion that none ever existed. And so his kingdom became quiet, too quiet, not peaceful, but paralyzed, not obedient, but terrified. And Vlad himself. He became the one man in Wallachia who could never rest. Because when you rule through fear, you can't step away. You become the fear, and the fear consumes you. Strategic breakdown. Paranoia as power, then poison. Vlad's descent into hyper-control is a masterclass in what happens when fear becomes the system instead of the strategy. Let's break it down. Distributed fear. By making everyone a potential informant, Vlad scaled fear horizontally, not just from ruler to subject, but peer to peer. This collapsed resistance before it could form. Uncertainty, amplification. No one knew what triggered punishment. This randomness made people overcorrect their behavior, a tactic used in modern authoritarian regimes and cults alike. Power feedback loop. As fear of rebellion increased, so did Vlad's brutality, which in turn increased fear, which then isolated him even more, creating a psychological loop he couldn't escape. But there's a dark truth hidden here. Fear creates control, until it creates madness. A message made for masters. Paranoia can build empires, but it also burns them. Vlad's brilliance was turning uncertainty into obedience, but his mistake was forgetting that fear has a half-life. Here's your edge. You can use uncertainty as a tactic, but if it becomes your identity, it will destroy you. Use paranoia to expose weakness, not define culture. Create pressure when needed to reveal who folds, but release it once the truth is exposed. Be unpredictable in action, not in intention. Let them guess what you'll do, not who you are. Don't confuse silence for strength. If no one challenges you anymore, it may not be because you've won, but because you've made them too afraid to speak. Because power without trust becomes a kingdom of ghosts. And when no one speaks your name, you've already been forgotten. Part 5. When the world strikes back, facing rebellion and the cost of dread. The problem with ruling by fear is eventually people fear you more than they fear your enemies. For a time, Vlad was untouchable. Merchants obeyed, nobles vanished, criminals simply stopped existing. But in the shadows, across borders, and inside cracked castle walls, a new energy was forming. Resistance. The nobles who had escaped his purges whispered in foreign courts. The boyars who bowed too quickly now dreamed of revenge behind closed doors. The Ottomans, once repelled by his terror, began rethinking their fear. Because power built on fear doesn't dissolve, it invites conquest. Vlad had no allies. His brutality had made sure of that. He had ruled alone. And now he would stand alone. In 1462, the Ottoman Empire sent an invasion force, not a scouting party, not a warning shot, but an army led by Sultan Mehmed II himself, the conqueror of Constantinople. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a public execution, waiting to happen. But Vlad wouldn't meet them on the battlefield. Not in the traditional sense. He did something else. He emptied the countryside, burned the fields, poisoned the wells. He made his own homeland unlivable to everyone. And then, when the Ottoman forces reached the city of Târgoviște, they found it deserted, but not empty. They found a forest of 20,000 impaled corpses. Turks, traitors, soldiers, civilians, every stake placed deliberately, every body a message. Even Mehmed II paused. The conqueror who took Constantinople stood in silence before the grotesque display. Some say he was horrified, others say he turned away. Either way, he left. But not forever. Because when you build an empire from terror, you don't get to disappear when it starts to rot. Eventually, even fear decays. And so, with support from discontent nobles and a coalition of enemies, Vlad was finally overthrown. Not by foreign armies, but by fear itself, turning inward. Strategic breakdown. When fear breeds resistance. Vlad's story is not just a tale of darkness, it's a warning. When power becomes pure dread, even your victims learn to prefer death over silence. Let's break it down. Fear's expiration date. The same fear that protects you today will provoke revolt tomorrow. It's not sustainable. It's combustible. Isolation by intimidation. Vlad's unwillingness to trust or delegate made him vulnerable. He killed not just enemies, but potential allies. And when real threats emerged, there was no one left to defend him. Terror without renewal. A fear-based system needs fresh victories or evolving myths to stay alive. Vlad relied too long on his own legend, and the silence became stagnant. This is why psychological warfare must evolve or implode. If the only thing keeping people in line is the terror of yesterday, they will build the courage to end it tomorrow. A message made for masters. Even fear has a shelf life. Vlad's greatest failure wasn't cruelty. It was forgetting that every empire of dread eventually turns inward. Here's your edge. You can use fear to seize power, but not to sustain it. Build fear into strategy, not identity. Be feared for your intelligence, not your instability. Let your strength be memorable, but your values be clear. Know when to pivot. Once you've established dominance, evolve it. Turn fear into reverence, or at least respect. Don't outlive your legend. If your tactics become predictable, your enemies become brave. Change before they decide to change you. Because when the fear you created becomes the monster you must outrun, you're not a ruler anymore. You're just next. Part 6. Legacy of a monster. Immortality through terror. Some men are remembered for what they built. Vlad was remembered for what he destroyed and what he made others afraid to become. After his fall, Vlad vanished, swallowed by shifting alliances, foreign imprisonment, and political exile. He would briefly reclaim power, only to disappear again. Eventually, he died. Some say in battle, others say assassinated. But the truth? It didn't matter. Because Vlad the man had already been replaced by Vlad the myth, the archetype, the monster that lived beyond the grave. His legacy was never written in treaties or family trees. It was carved into fear itself. Fathers warned sons about the price of disloyalty using his name. Kings studied his tactics in secret. Artists painted him not as a man, but as a nightmare in a crown. And then, centuries later, the myth was reborn. Dracula. Bram Stoker's 1897 novel didn't just create a fictional vampire. It resurrected Vlad, gave him fangs, immortality, and made sure the fear he manufactured outlived every empire that tried to erase him. Because in the end, Vlad achieved something most rulers only dream of. He ruled not just a country, but the human imagination. His was not a legacy of love, or peace, or beauty. It was a legacy of control, of dominance, of obedience born from dread. And whether history condemns him, forgets him, or mythologizes him, Vlad the Impaler achieved what few ever could. He became death with a strategy. Strategic breakdown. The power of psychological immortality. Vlad's final and greatest manipulation wasn't political or military. It was existential. He implanted fear so deeply into the minds of others that he became unkillable. Let's break it down. Symbolic immortality. Vlad transformed from a mortal ruler into a symbol, a ghost that haunts culture, literature, and collective fear. His tactics became legends, his cruelty, folklore. Weaponized legacy. Instead of erasing his crimes, he ensured they would be amplified, making his enemies fear, even remembering him. Over time, this mutated into myth. Dark archetype engineering. Vlad engineered not just rule, but a role, a blueprint of the merciless sovereign. His story became a manual, a warning, a mythos. His immortality didn't come from living forever. It came from becoming unforgettable. A message made for masters. Fear dies fast. Myth lasts forever. Vlad's fear tactics worked, but his greatest achievement wasn't horror, it was haunting. Here's your edge. You can manipulate, dominate, and control, but your true legacy is what people whisper when you're no longer in the room. Build symbols, not just victories. A single story, true or not, can outlive 100 factual achievements. Design your image deliberately. Become more than what you do. Become what others believe you are. Plant legend in the soil of fear. If they can't forget what you did, they'll never ignore what you could do. Because control ends when you die. But if done right, influence becomes eternal.